Hey, welcome to today's Elephant in the Room session, and we have a special guest with us today. Zeb Portanova is a private equity CEO. He runs the GEM Opportunity Zone Fund. And, Zeb, man, how long have we known each other? Has it been a decade, maybe more now?
It's been a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, just by way of background, I'll do a quick summary bio so that everybody knows who Zeb is. And then Zeb, any blanks that you want to fill in, you can feel free. But just starting with educational background, Zeb has his undergraduate from University of Florida. He's got his master's in public policy from Harvard, a Duke MBA. He started out his career in life sciences and pharma at Lilly. Then became a manufacturing CEO. He also ran kind of a social impact business, maybe the largest social impact business on the planet, as a chief operating officer, and now he's the CEO of GEM. But Zeb, welcome, and if there's anything I've left out, feel free to layer that in.
Nope, that's perfect. My wife jokes with me and says, "Why don't I go off and get my PhD?" And I insist with her that I'm done paying for schooling for myself, but anywhere my girls and wife want to go, they're welcome to.
Yeah. One of the things that you do kind of aside from everything else is you're also the chairman of the South Carolina YPO chapter. And I know that's a pretty big passion for you. Tell us about that. How did that come about?
Yeah. So I joined YPO when I became the president and CEO for a company called Swiss Chrono. It basically allowed me to become YPO eligible. And for those who don't know, YPO stands for Young Presidents Organization. It's a global leadership organization that's really, pretty much in most countries around the world. In order to qualify, you have to meet certain thresholds around number of employees that report up in your organization. There's normally a sales revenue threshold. And when I was able to join, I quickly found out that this was unlike any other group or affiliation I've ever had. And Mike, as you mentioned, between being a Harvard graduate and a Duke graduate, YPO's not just network, but the support structure they provide was super unique and created a massive amount of value right off the bat. I think, people say that it's lonely at the top when you're the CEO, especially for me coming into a new industry and a new state where I was meeting people. And YPO has, they're kind of famous for something called Forum, which is, a gathering every month of, anywhere from 6 to 10 of your YPO peers. You stay together the entire year, or some people stay together for a lifetime. And you talk about whatever's important to you, the things you've done really well in the last month, the things you've done poorly. It's personal, it's business. So I got a massive amount out of it. And I started realizing, kind of like everything else in life, that the more you put in, the more you get out. And so I got involved with YPO's leadership and putting events on. And last year I held an event in Geneva, Switzerland with a Harvard Business School professor of mine, and it happened to win Event of the Year for all of Europe. So again, I'm passionate about it because I make great relationships and some business comes out of it, but mostly because you just meet really, really good people and they end up being a really good support network for you.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've always loved about you, Zeb, is that, you're passionate about everything you do, or you just don't do it. You're all in on everything. And, that's one of the things that I want to talk about today, because a lot of people don't necessarily have exposure to private equity. A lot of people don't understand opportunity zones, and you're one of the good guys in the business. So I wanted to give you a chance to kind of voice your perspective on these things. So, why don't you share with us a little bit about opportunity zones? Just kind of give everybody like a 2-3 minute overview, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. So Opportunity zone tax legislation was passed a couple of years ago. And what it essentially did was allow people with a capital gain that they were having. Real estate previously always had these things called 1031 exchanges, which allowed you to take a gain in commercial real estate and pass that gain forward without having to pay tax. And in very simplistic terms, opportunity zone legislation allowed that sort of structure to occur for anybody else outside of just real estate. So it could be a stock that you bought for $1 that you sold for 10, or a business that you owned and built up and then sold. It could even be your stamp collection. Whatever you had a capital gain appreciation for was now eligible for opportunity zone tax treatment. And so but it was unique. It wasn't just like a 1031 exchange in real estate. What it did was it allowed you to defer paying your capital gains tax until technically 2026 or 2027 when your tax bill is due on April 15th. So you defer paying your capital gains. You'd even have a small reduction. It could be 10 or 15% depending on when you enter. So you're paying less capital gain, you're paying it further out. But the real benefit actually became the fact that if you hold on to that investment for a 10-year period, so if you invested in 2019 and held on to that investment until 2029, any appreciation you held in that investment was completely tax-free upon your exit. So if you invested in a piece of real estate or bought a company and it went from 10 million to 100 million as an example, otherwise you would have paid capital gains on $90 million at the 10th year. And this treatment allows you to basically exit completely tax-free. And I would say when Senator Tim Scott, who's my South Carolina senator, when he was drafting this legislation, I mean, his vision was to take unique tax structure and channel those dollars into areas that otherwise may not have ever or would not ever receive these sorts of investments or this sort of treatment. So, I mean, I think there can be a little bit of debate, and we can talk about it on this video chat here around have they been successful? You know, they've been in place really and been implemented for about, you know, I'd say year and a half now. People have really been pretty deep in these. Have they been as successful as people want? Sure, there's always room for improvement, but I can give you example after example after example of folks like me or others that are driving their investments towards these opportunity zone areas. There's about 8,000 of them around the country. They're literally a geographic area based on census, and you know, you have to invest in that area in order to reach these this tax treatment, special tax treatment.
Yeah, so it seems like a double win, right? I mean, it's a great way to funnel capital into areas that previously haven't been viewed as maybe the best investment opportunities. So, you know, it's kind of a win-win deal. And I think there are like actually 8,700 of these things around the country.
Yep.
So you have a chance to kind of, you know, go into food deserts, go into areas that have blighted real estate, areas that have economic challenges, create jobs. I mean, it's a pretty cool deal. I think the biggest struggle that I've seen is that there are a lot of people that have formed opportunity zone funds, but they haven't actually been able to fund them, right? You know, they've struggled raising money. Yeah. And one of the things that's interesting about you is you haven't had that struggle. You've got a lot of capital. You've got participation from local governments. I mean, you've done a phenomenal job and you've got projects on the books. So, you know, there's a lot of good things happening. I don't know, questions for Zeb from Shana, Rue, or Jacco?
Yeah, Zeb, this is Jacco, phoning in from the Netherlands. Actually, I'm not very familiar with opportunity zones, but it sounds like a very interesting concept. Is this a US only based initiative, or is it also possible for European investors to participate?
So it is a US based initiative, and the tax advantages come from if anybody has a US tax liability, technically a US capital gains tax liability. So that would segregate out a certain portion of the planet that wouldn't otherwise have that. They wouldn't be able to invest and get that same specialized tax treatment. But you know, one of the things that we always said is when we were building out our strategy and our investment portfolio was these need to be really good investments first and foremost. And the fact that they fall into an opportunity zone and it can have social impact on top of that are gravy on top. But we're not going to take a mediocre or poor investment and run that play just because the opportunity zone tax treatment, you know, bumps it up a little bit. So said another way, I have people who've invested with us who didn't have capital gains. They just really liked the investments that we had put together and the returns that we were projecting and the social impact we were going to have. And so they were able to come in and do so without having capital gains. So that's a very simplified way of saying technically anybody can come in if they like the investment portfolio. But if you're a European and you don't have the U.S. Capital gain tax liability, then you don't get all of the benefit. Yeah. But if the investment's good, the investment's good, and people, you know, if they want to invest and see their dollars grow and have a social impact, then you know this was basically designed for that.
The reality is there are people from all over the globe that have made investments here in the United States. Historically, it's been kind of considered a very safe and secure investment market. So there are a lot of people in Europe and Asia and the Middle East that do have capital gains issues here in the US. So
that's right.
As individuals or as corporate entities or as single purpose entities, they can participate and win big in these things. So.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And I'd say given all the, not just economic turmoil, but political turmoil that we see across the planet at any given time. I mean, clearly the US, and don't get me wrong, we have our own share of challenges right now we're facing, but I'd still, this is, of all the places on the planet you want to live and put a dollar that's going to be, as safe and hopefully going to grow for you. I mean, America was certainly at the top of the list, I would say.
Yeah, I understand that the EU kind of missed the boat a little bit with the Microsofts and the Googles of this world. There's some fiscal measures and there's some R&D credits that you can get, and there's an innovation box to kind of stimulate investments in software and medicine type of R&D new tech. But the concept of an opportunity zone is really something very interesting. And I see one of our partners also made the comment on a live comment that I think we really need to look at this form of capital investment in Europe too, if it's so successful as it looks like.
I have a question. It might be one of those hardballs Mike mentioned before we came on live, but something that came to mind as you were talking about opportunity zones, and I don't know if you guys can hear that, but that's my dog under the table. Opportunity zones, and there being around 8,000 to 800 or 8,700. It made me wonder how much of these opportunity zones, or how many of them overlap with red line neighborhoods, neighborhoods that were basically drawn around saying, do not invest here, in the 60s, that still have impacts today on where people can live and how neighborhoods have developed.
Yeah.
Does that come up in conversation?
So Shana, I think that's a really interesting insight. I have not had a conversation with anybody around it yet, but it wouldn't be, let's extrapolate on that a little bit, right? It wouldn't be out of the realm of unrealistic to say these rural economically, or even urban and economically depressed areas probably have a very long history of reasons why investment hasn't been made there. And I think everyone's probably going to be just a little different. Some of it might be banking policy that went back into the 50s and 60s and 70s. Some of it could be about I guess white flight and from urban areas into suburban areas. I can't speak as to if there's an overlap or not. What I would say is it all of a sudden creates an additional incentive to drive economic investment to those areas. And in my opinion, I think that's a really good thing, right? Because with economic investment, yes, you're going to have challenges around, folks being priced out of a new market. There's gentrification that occurs, and that is an issue, right? And that's going to be an issue anytime there's going to be investment. And so luckily we have what I would say are pretty good policies in place around affordable housing, Section 8 vouchers, low-income housing tax credits, things that are purposely dedicated to ensure affordable housing in these areas. And a lot of mixed-use developments might even require an affordable housing component. But so you're going to have gentrification that occurs, but you're also going to, with those investments come new jobs and higher paying jobs. And so I'd say the folks who are willing and want to be part of that, if the tide is rising and you're investing in that area, they can be part of that upward mobility if they position themselves accordingly. But your point's a good one, right? I mean, I can't tell you, I haven't seen analysis around where redlining and OZs end up fitting, but my guess is they probably were pretty overlapped. And so this is just a way to continue to make sure there's investment that happens there. You're into affordable housing, right? You like.
I am. That's why it came to my mind.
Sure.
It's something that I'm learning more about, especially recently with the protests and calling for action in terms of how to address systemic racism. Redlining was something that I think I might have learned about in high school, but then forgot about. and then recently have been digging into that more to understand how it was applied, because it wasn't necessarily a law, but it was how mortgage or banks applied mortgages and like who was allowed to have them and stuff like that. And so it's more nuanced.
I mean, I can tell you, I didn't learn about it. I didn't learn about it in school. I didn't learn about it at Harvard. I mean, I wrote my master's thesis on affordable housing development. So for me, we knew it existed, but it wasn't like, we didn't do a super deep dive on like banking policy that allows for homeowners versus renters. Thankfully, there were great organizations. Yeah, there were some minority-owned banks, and there were incentives that were put in place for other banks to invest in lower income areas. But then, you had nonprofits that stepped in, like Habitat for Humanity, that their mission and focus was on affordable housing development in areas for people that otherwise wouldn't qualify. And, certainly there's a ton of work that can be done and more work that should be done. But I'm glad we're having, I hope that conversation continues in a vigorous way, so we make sure that most people are able to have safe, decent, affordable housing available to them.
Yeah, I remember actually seeing kind of like a heat map and an overlay of OZs on different areas. And, it's been a while, so I can't recall with specificity, but I will tell you that there was overlap in some of those areas, and quite a few of them actually.
Yeah.
And I think that was really important to Tim Scott and his committee when they were drawing this up, is not to exclude areas that had previously been excluded, right? I mean, I think that was a core principle of the legislation. Hey, another question, Zeb. If I wanted to relocate a business into an opportunity zone, so let's say I just moved my business into an opportunity zone, and then later I exited that business, would there be any economic benefit for doing that at all?
So the challenge would be, if you already owned it and you moved it in, you wouldn't be able to qualify. Now, if you bought a business, and it either was in an opportunity zone or you moved it into an opportunity zone, then yes. I mean, if you, in that circumstance, you would have significant tax advantages for doing that, right? So if you bought a business, we're going to use round numbers here. You bought a business for $1 million, and you moved it into an opportunity zone, you would have to, and they've got this test called substantial improvement, which means if it's for real estate and your building is valued at $1 million, you need to double the value of, you have to invest double what the building is valued at. For a business, it's a little more complicated. I'll try not to get into too much detail here, but you would need to invest a substantial amount. So say you bought a business for $1 million, you put it into an opportunity zone, you doubled your capital that the business already held. So maybe you add an extra $500,000 of equipment to that business. That would probably get you to qualify. And then you sold that business for $10 million 10 years down the road. Your gain on that business would be completely tax-free. There's one key other point, though, is you have to use the capital gain to make the investment in the first place, or you wouldn't have that special treatment. So you have to sell an asset that has a gain in order to qualify for that 10 years of capital gain tax-free growth.
So if I'm an entrepreneur and I exit a business, I just roll that gain in, start my next business in an OZ, and it's a win-win-win, right? Create jobs, shelter the capital gain, exit the next event on a tax-free basis.
Yeah, I mean it's
ding ding ding.
I've
Sounds like a good idea.
I've never seen tax legislation that's been this favorable before. I mean, 1031's kind of got there, but that was always on commercial real estate. This just gives so much more flexibility and is specifically focused for economic development in these, I would say, depressed areas.
Yeah. Zeb, you've been pretty quiet. You got any questions?
No, right now I'm just absorbing a lot and learning a lot, actually. So I'm pretty sure some questions will come to me.
I'm going to help you out then. I have a question for you, Zeb. Just for my understanding, is an economic zone or let's say an opportunity zone, is it always linked to a geography, to a piece of land, or can you also kind of widen this concept and think of an opportunity zone as a healthcare or the environment or sustainability, so that you kind of decouple it from a specific geography and make it kind of an entity. Can you explain a little bit more about?
So if I understand the question, so what I will say is the way the legislation was written, that it has to fall in one of these 8,700 geographic areas that are really based off of census tracts and the last census data that we have. So yes, I mean, there are many circumstances where if you are, and I've had plenty of properties that we've looked at, if you're literally on the wrong side of the line, you don't qualify. It's that simple, and there's all these great maps out there that help you understand where exactly those geographic boundaries are. So unfortunately, it has to fall into that geographic boundary zone. Now, on the flip side, I think maybe this is where you might be going with like the broader sense of impact. There are certainly measurables you can track on, you know, the easiest one is number of jobs created, and, you know, I guess also, you know, dollars invested in an area. But then through those things over a 10-year period, you can track and see, okay, well, what did the quality of life,
exactly,
how did that improve over a period of time, right? And I think it's still so new. I mean, a lot of these investments haven't, you know, they're no more than a year or 18 months, maybe 2 years old in these OZs. But the intent is over a 10-year period to track and see, hey, how did quality of life improve for these areas? What did median income do? You know, was there, you know, can you track, for example, if you're having issues with literacy rates? You know, we've got a project right now that's a food security project. And so to be able to very, very clearly show how 50 or 60 million Americans in the southeastern United States have access to fresh produce within a day's drive. I don't know how much you guys know about produce, but happens to be that about 90% of lettuce is grown and imported either from Mexico or California. So somebody in South Carolina or Florida or anywhere on the Eastern coast, that's a lot of food miles that piece of lettuce has to travel in order to get to somebody. And it's normally not very fresh. So you know, we are in the process of building a project that will allow for fresh produce that is grown without pesticides, that is, you know, it's not even just organic, it's pesticide free, and it's indoor, and it can be picked on one day, and basically in the customer's, you know, like any of us go to a Kroger or Publix or whatnot, and it can be available for consumption within 24 hours. So you can start measuring, you know, quality of life, you can measure health, you can measure all these things. But I think those are more long-term trends that I think people want to measure. It's just not as easy as saying, you know, if I've got one project, you know, mine are large enough that they probably can track some of those KPIs, but yeah, I think the administration, any administration, politics aside, is going to want to see, you know, what kind of positive impact have opportunity zones created over a period of time.
Yeah. Zeb, can you dive in and give maybe a more specific example of a project with more detail to talk about the scope and size and scale of the impact that you guys are going to have?
Sure. So I'm going to share some stuff. I got to keep it somewhat general only because this isn't public yet, but it will be later this summer. So we've got I was mentioning this agricultural project. We called it Agricultural Technology Campus. Really the first of its kind in the country, which was kind of shocking to me, but bringing multiple users together that all have a whole bunch of synergy, but they've never co-located before. And so all things said and done, this will be located in the Southeast. It's in an opportunity zone. We'll probably create close to 1,500 jobs in a rural area in the Southeast. And it's controlled indoor, highly capitally intensive agriculture, like think very, very state-of-the-art greenhouses for lettuce and tomatoes, and then a co-packer in the middle that specializes in taking anything that was either B-grade product, even A-grade product, and turning it into fresh salsas and pasta sauce and fresh pesto. And so you can do this, create food security. Within 400 miles, we've got about 50 million, 60 million Americans that within a day's drive will have fresh produce arriving for them. And this project itself, when it's done, will have more, it'll have more investment than the totality of the rest of the county we are investing in when you aggregate all their other real estate assets combined. So, you know, talk about job creation, food security. I don't know how you guys felt in the middle of COVID, but there are many days when I went to the grocery store with my mask on and was walking around going, oh my goodness, there's not much stuff on the shelves right now. And supply chains got really disrupted. And so we got super excited. We've been working on this project for about a year now, and COVID actually escalated it significantly because people said we can't be importing from Mexico or taking the food miles from California or whatnot. We need to have regional food security for the 50 million Americans that are within 400 miles. And so, yeah, that's been a major social impact we're going to be able to touch on. But you get to do good and you get to do business at the same time, and that's always a great sweet spot to be in, right?
Yeah, I mean, think about that. You're talking about literally hundreds of millions of dollars, would be my guess, based on what I just heard, put into an area that previously wouldn't have had that type of investment, created massive amounts of jobs, good social. I mean, I think this is phenomenal. If investors out there or developers or people with business opportunities have an idea and they need funding, talk about your investment guidelines. I mean, what would you want to see from people? What would fall outside your investment guidelines?
Yeah, we've really found, I don't know if the word niche is the right word, a strategic alignment in the world of agriculture. But it's not outdoor growing. It's high science, high capex, which inevitably end up meaning, barriers to entry, right? If you're thinking about it from a business standpoint. But we've invested in the world of healthcare and agriculture. So one of our portfolio companies is a CBD grower. They've spent the last many years developing their own CBD genetics, the seed genetics, growing algorithms. Because we believe that on the healthcare side, CBD, though not a ton of research has been done about it, we think there's a massive opportunity there, not just for things like pain relief, but a whole host of other issues that the doctors will eventually be able to promote to. We just see massive opportunity there. But so that's kind of a new and growing space that we're fairly bullish on. In the world of this agricultural project, for us, that's important because we know people need produce. It's not going away. I mean, tomatoes only have a certain amount of shelf life. Lettuce only has a certain amount of shelf life. Berries have a certain amount of shelf life. And when you're importing them from across the country, that's a challenge. So when we looked at that, we said massive need. We can basically grow product without having any use of pesticides. So that strategically fit in our wheelhouse. But then there's going to be that campus is going to have all these really unique ancillary investments that come off of it. So think, Mike, in the world of plastics. So we're looking at a plastics company right now because every one of these salad containers or lettuce containers or fresh pesto containers is going to need to be packaged somehow. And so we've got, happens to be a YPO colleague of ours whose non-compete ended in the plastic space about a year ago. And we're super excited to explore an investment opportunity with him where that campus is going to need those things and our end users are going to need those things. And there's good synergy across the board. For us, we put our flag in the ground on a number of different investments, and now we seek out really unique synergies on how we can continue to create more value for everybody that comes in. One of those is we're exploring, and I'll say this lastly, we're exploring a solar energy solution for a number of our projects. And I've, whether I like it or not, kind of become a bit of a solar energy expert on how you pull this off. Some of the utilities are more challenging than others to deal with, but for the most part, to be able to offer lower energy rates to our end users, we found that to be actually very, very valuable, not just for them, but we can make money when we're doing it at the same time. So again, it comes back to a lot of synergy, and I'd say investment criteria. If it creates synergy for us, if it was a good investment to make, regardless of the OZ structure, we'll normally consider it. We just found this really unique position in the world of high-tech agriculture that we can capitalize on and will continue to.
I think that's awesome. Jaco, looked like you had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I mean, I guess that the gains for investing in these opportunity zones would be lower than just investing your money on the stock exchange, or is that the wrong assumption?
I would say
why would a big company, if I'm a big company and I have the opportunity to invest on the New York Stock Exchange, in some rising stars, or I have the opportunity to invest my money in an opportunity zone? Why would I go for an opportunity zone if I could, for instance, put my money into SpaceX?
Well, I mean, I would say you can probably do both. I don't think it's an and/or situation, but let me give you if you had to pick one, if for whatever reason you had a gun to your head and you say, okay, let's talk about the pros and cons. You go into a portfolio of stocks, even if I would never say, hey, take all your eggs and throw them into SpaceX or Tesla or my family company, Eli Lilly. I wouldn't say put everything in there, but if you had a diversified portfolio that mimics the S&P, I mean, on average, you're going to get 10 to 12% appreciation over a period of time. That's really good, right? And it's good to have diversification. So I would say use a portion of your assets and make that investment play. But on the flip side, private equity normally does significantly better than the public markets can. And so, we've got an investment right now that, as the landlord on it, we get paid a minimum of 15% annual lease payments. And that doesn't take into account when we have a revenue sharing royalty of 2.5% also, and we own 10% of that company. So if they exit, not only are we making 15% a year in dividends, and we're distributing those out to our investors, but the more they sell, the better we do, and so we'll get even another big check after the financials are audited. And then if they ever selling off to a large healthcare company, which is something that is those conversations are already being had right now, then we'll participate in that exit on the upside also. So I'd say if the wrong private equity investments, if somebody was really, really dead set on having an impact fund that got below market returns, but you were measuring that because of the social impact benefit, that's okay, because that's where you're intending to go. We are trying to accomplish all of those things at once, right? We're trying to get above market returns in areas that we're very bullish on and have social impact while doing so. And so that just happens to be the sweet spot of where we operate, because our investors and these partners of ours have really play well in that space.
Yeah. Here's the difference. I think my belief as somebody that's owned businesses for most of my adult life is that the internal rates of return you generate on a business investment are significantly better with typically less volatility. So, that's right. But when you go into the stock market, you've got more volatility, ostensibly lower blended yields, but what you have is liquidity, and that's right. The big difference. So if you need to put your cash into an investment that is fungible, this liquid kind of on demand, go into equities. But if you're looking for bigger rates of return, lower volatility, and you have the patience with that capital to not have to deal with liquidity for 10 years, you're going to make more money there. So it's an asset allocation thing. I think Zeb's right. But if you have the ability to make an investment into private equity and especially into opportunity zones, I think you have maybe more control over that investment because you know what the investment guidelines are going in, and you know where your money's going and what it's going to be doing. When you put it into equities, things can change really fast, right? New CEO comes in, brand takes a hit, stock goes up and down all over the place. You're just not going to see that in opportunity zone investments, but that's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah.
I'm with you, Mike. I'd say if you have a 10-year horizon on any of your investments, odds are that's going to work out really well for you, be it in public equities where you have liquidity or in private equity. We have a 10-year horizon on everything we do on the private equity side, but I own a bunch of stocks. And for me, I'm thinking about, I hope not to sell those for 20, 30, 40 years if I don't have to. So it's about asset allocation and I would say cash needs on a short and medium term basis.
Hey, one thing I want to talk about, we've been doing a lot of the PE opportunity zone thing, and we can go back to that. But, one of the things that has always impressed me about you, Zeb, is, you've kind of had a little bit of a Midas touch. You've had great success in virtually everything that I've seen you do. We all have, things in our portfolio that don't go as intended, but in the decade plus that I've known you, you do very, very well in generally every environment. And I think one of the reasons for that is you're just an exceptional leader, right? I've watched you as a COO, a CEO, a board member, and you just have a good way about you. I mean, talk to us about your leadership style for a second.
I'm pointing over. There's a book in the background over here. If you guys have heard of it, it's Hacking Leadership. No, Mike, you wrote that book, and I mean, I remember getting a copy of it when we first started having conversations, and I think that book is still spot on today as it was years ago when you wrote it. I mean, for me, I liken a lot of my leadership style to being a servant leader. I would say there's really no job that I wouldn't do, or there are times when you shouldn't do the work for your people, but you want them to believe that you genuinely care about them. Yeah. I think you need to be authentic. If you're not, people see through that so fast. I know I certainly do when you got questions about it, and it gets magnified if you've got 500 or 1,000 people underneath you. They'll see through that super quickly. So it needs to be authentic leadership. It needs to be, you have to engage with folks. I'm not saying you need to memorize every single spouse's name, but they need to know that you actually care. Take the time, meet your people, and help them make their work fun, enjoyable, and successful. And I found that when you do that, people will run through a brick wall for you. I was working in an organization, and I called like a pulse survey. We did an engagement survey with our employees, and found that in some regards, the trust factor, which is, I think, might be the most critical cornerstone of anything that you do in a company, right? If you don't have trust, you're not going to get very far otherwise. And the trust factor on some attributes was through the roof, and the trust factor on other attributes was in the floor. And I just never seen this complete swing on both sides before. And when you look at that, you go, okay, well, I stepped in fairly new to this and said, what can we do to improve that? Like, what's the root cause of what's driving that issue right there on why the lowest level is so low? And we found out what it was, and a lot of it had to do with communication from senior leadership. And so then you put initiatives in place to help start driving that. So I think it's, if you care about your employees and you're authentically engaged with them, and you do need to be smart at business. I mean, you need to know how to own a P&L, and sometimes it's make tough decisions. But even those tough decisions, I've had plenty of times when I've let people go, that I've had folks come up to me afterwards and say, thank you for doing that. Because it was, for lack of a better term, they were a cancer within this community, and having to make those tough leadership decisions. In the end, it might be tough at the time, but it propels the organization forward, and then people will rally behind it because they have so much more fun when they're at their workplace. So I guess that's my roundabout way of saying, servant leadership, authentic engagement. You got to do that. If you do that stuff really well, treat people with respect. And I've never felt like I was better than anybody. I think that gets you in big trouble right off the bat. So just treat people like they were, a friend or an employee that you cared about, and normally they'll go the extra mile for you. At least that's what I found.
Yeah, one other thing I'll say, just based on my observation, is work ethic. You lead by example. You lead from the front. I've had emails from you and texts at weird times on, weekends, and you're mentally engaged, right? You're just, and your team, your team knows that you're working hard, right?
Well, but Mike, when you love what you do, and you do need to find, I don't know if it's balance isn't the right word, but being intentional with your time. So there are times when I'm very intentional about spending time with my family. I've got two awesome little girls. They're 7 and 9. My wife is amazing. And, we've got 2 English bulldogs. One of them is named Waffles, Shayna, right? And so, for me, I want to be intentional, but when I'm super excited about what I'm doing, like, there is no off filter. My wife gave up, we've been together for 19 years. She gave up probably 15 years ago trying to have me turn things off, because that's just not how I operate. If I wake up in the middle of the night, it can be 2 a.m. I'm super jazzed about something we're working on, or we've got a problem that I need to problem solve. I mean, look, life's about, every business is not going to be complete, cupcakes and rainbows for the course of your career. So you're going to have challenges. It's how you deal with those challenges that matter. And half the fun is figuring out the really tough ones, because if it was easy, then anybody would do it, right?
Yeah. No, it was interesting. I was up until almost 1 last night working on an idea, and I was up at 4:30 this morning, and I don't do that every day, but I have the same problem. I mean, the mind it just doesn't turn off easily. I'd like to figure out how to get to turn it off more easily, but I struggle with that at times too.
Well, so one of the things I found, so I started doing CrossFit a number of years ago, and I'm poor to mediocre at best. But there's 2 things I love about CrossFit, and it can be any athletic, right? Anything that helps you kind of, your mind will still be thinking about things. Or at least I found I'm still thinking about things when I'm not consciously thinking about them, right? So there's when you create that space where you can, your mind can kind of go blank, or zen, for lack of a better word, and CrossFit kind of does that for me. But it can be riding a bike, or it could be yoga, or it could be something else. So create that space, and all of a sudden really unique ideas pop up when you're doing that. And the second thing I love about CrossFit is not a day goes by when it doesn't scare the heck out of me. So I sit there and look at it and go, that workout's going to be absolutely terrible. I don't want to do that, because it's going to be painful, right? But nothing bonds people together like I guess suffering in a controlled suffering environment like CrossFit. So I found that I create great friends. I challenge myself every day, and it creates that space to really problem solve in a good way. So that's my shameless plug for all my CrossFit friends out there. They've had their own issues. I don't know if you guys have checked what's been going on in the CrossFit space, but man, the former owner, he hasn't technically sold everything yet, but he's about to, and he made some very, very problematic remarks. But that was a long ways coming. I'm glad that there's going to be a new ownership there, and we've got new leadership in that space. But anyway,
Hey, you just opened Pandora's box for me, so I'm going to just jump right in. So, you see today business leaders, debating on social commentary. Do I say something? Don't I say something? Do I sponsor something? Do I not? And you're seeing, real ramifications. I mean, I can remember 10 years ago, a CEO could more or less say anything they wanted to say within reason, and they could kind of navigate their way through that. Today, we're just living in a different world. I mean, how do you deal with that? How do you manage that?
It's been challenging, because I think even with good intentions, if you're not careful with how you say things, even with good intentions, you can find yourself in trouble. Now, I personally believe that that authenticity can go a really long way, and honesty and integrity. And when you make a mistake, own up about it and admit that mistake. So one of the things I was part of, there's a lot going. There's a lot of justified social unrest happening in our country right now, and I was for my YPO chapter. Our chapter actually ends up being the largest chapter in the world. We have over 600 members, and I was on the board of directors as the diversity and inclusion officer, which is kind of funny. You've got I guess funny to the extent that you got a white dude running diversity and inclusion. So let's call that out for what it's worth right now. But I'm passionate about that, and have been for a long time. And the lady who was an African-American woman asked me to take her place because she knew this was something that I was really passionate about. So we started looking at data and found out that our chapter YPO internationally has about 10% female members. And we don't track any other data besides male, female, right? We don't know if someone's, African-American in the US or Muslim or whatnot. We just don't have that data. So what we do have is male or female. So that's the first metric we were able to track. And we were able to look at that and go, wow. So if YPO international is only at 10%, which is, let's admit, there's a massive amount of work that needs to be done there. How where do we stand as a chapter? And we found out, well, we were twice as bad. We were at 5%. Yeah. So then we all sat back and we're like, holy cow. First, let's admit there's an issue. And we did. We said, hey, here's the data. We shared it with all of our members. And then we said, okay, well, what can we do about it? So we put some groups together to brainstorm around, hey, what are the things we can be doing to drive more diversity and inclusion? We track this metric around women. How do we make that go from 5 to 10%? And so things like having female leadership. So the lady who's going to follow me in South Carolina as the chapter, the South Carolina state chair, is a great lady named Tyler Easterling. And Tyler's going to follow me because we want to have diversity on our leadership team. And we looked, and then we looked around and said, well, goodness, if we're a bunch of white guys, and this can apply to not just YPO, can apply to your boards of directors, your nonprofits, your for-profits, your executive leadership teams. You look around and go, if you're a bunch of white folks, I've always found the most successful a team is, the more diverse a team is, the better the results they normally achieve. And encouraging dissenting opinions, I've always found, is tremendously important. The folks that don't do that, in my experience, and Mike, you write about it, right? You need to be able to have diverse opinions. You may not agree with everything they say, but that needs to be able to put out there, and people need to be trusting they can put that out there. And so, you get a CEO that stands up and puts their foot in their mouth. And let's use the CrossFit example, right? Because it's a blatantly bad one. That organization could have done so much good in the world if with the right leadership, and instead they floundered under this guy named Greg Glassman, who was the founder. He owned 100% of it, but he made some very, very insensitive, I'd even say borderline racist tweets that he had to reel back from. And now that came after a long history of making, in some ways he was some people referred to him as a bit of a bully. He wanted to poke people in the eye, and the CrossFit community just said, we've had enough, and they revolted, and they basically forced him into a sales scenario. And so he got replaced because he said some things, and he could have stood on his to the last second and burned his ship to the ground, but thankfully he didn't. So there are some CEOs that will admit defeat. I think he had, unfortunately, or fortunately for him, had to admit defeat. But I guess to get back to your point, Mike, it's a challenging time. Be authentic. Create diverse teams around you, because it's the right thing to do. Your company will perform better for it, and be vocal about that stuff. But as a white guy, I'm very sensitive too around, I don't want to come across as inauthentic. I don't want to make a statement that, could be viewed as trying to be political. Sometimes silence isn't the best answer, but when you just don't know, people just choose that. So I don't know. It's a tough time. It's a tough time with a lot of complex issues to navigate. Can I ask a question?
Client of ours.
Oh, go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say a client of ours was the former CEO of Trader Joe's, and he had a little saying. He's like, if you mess up, fess up, right? And a lot of times leaders just, it's like they're playing a game of dodgeball, right? They show up every day coated in Teflon, and they're just kind of bobbing and weaving. And, you can't lead like that. You just can't do it. So I think that authenticity component is huge. I think somebody else was, Zeb, you were going to ask a question?
So Shayna, with your advocacy work, and Rue as a minority, what advice do you give leaders in situations like this, right? We're in a very tumultuous time as a country. What kind of things do you guys share?
I can take a stab at that, Rue, if you even need some time. But I know that right now, for me, the most important thing for myself as a leader of my tiny house organization, but even within N2 Growth, I need to educate myself. There's still so much that I need to learn. And listening to people who have been doing this work their whole life, they're the best people to go to for this kind of question. I'm not the right person to ask just because I'm a gay woman, I haven't been studying systemic racism. I haven't been studying privilege, waffles. So for me, I need to go to the people who have been studying it and have been living it, and listen to their stories, listen to what they have determined are best courses of action, and move beyond just that paralysis of not knowing what to do and trying to figure out what to do. Because in every situation, depending on the context, there's a different course of action. And so the more that I can learn, the more different choices I can make in these situations. Even when it comes to like phrasing, that's really helpful to me, because when I am confronted with a situation or a racist remark, it's really shocking. And so if I already know, if I have like a script of like how to respond to a racist remark or something like that, or just to like even question it in a more effective way versus just like ignore it or pretend like it didn't happen, then we can have the conversation, because without conversation, we're never going to deal with this issue. If we continue to stay silent about it, when it happens in our lives, it'll continue to exist.
Well, and you brought up a great example. You brought up redlining today, right? You put that on the table, and we had a chance to talk about it. And granted, I'm certainly no expert on it, but I'm going to go spend some time reading more about it now, right? Because that got put out there. And I think if people, again, are genuinely curious and authentic and want to, and come at this like they want to help people, the fact that you brought that up, I think that's great for the group. Let's talk about that, and let's do that with a lot of things, right? I feel like we don't cultivate dissenting opinions, and it doesn't have to be dissenting, right? We just don't. It's so polarizing in our country right now that I wish more people would be willing to listen to the other side without making them the devil.
That's what we have
to. That's the big thing, right? I mean, and that's the line that everybody has to learn to straddle. How do you have an authentic, candid conversation where you can express a dissenting opinion and not, now I'm not saying the CrossFit guy did the right thing, because I think it was absolutely wrong, but you've got a founder, owner, 100% shareholder that just lost everything he built because he didn't think, or he thought improperly, right? So, how do you express opinions to people that have differing opinions and have an intellectually honest conversation without trying to bludgeon one another, right? I think that's the, how do you learn? How do you grow? You don't have to fight. I don't know. Rue, what do you think?
You guys kind of answer for me was have and encourage the uncomfortable conversations. But I think for me is create that environment where people feel comfortable having the conversation. I'll use us as an example. I think Mike, for example, goes live with me every Tuesday, and I probably push those buttons every other Tuesday, and we get to places that may be uncomfortable. But I think that is the piece that sometimes we're lacking. And I think also as individual, I think we got to a place where there's a lot of lack of accountability all over the place. And I mean, from self-accountability, group accountability, it's easy to point the finger before holding up the mirror. So if we can share that message somehow, and I mean in every aspect of it, there are things that we as individuals can do, we as a group can do before we even start playing the blaming game to be able to move anything forward.
Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, I spend a lot of time in self-reflection because I'm old, right? I think about all the stuff, all the history, and I don't really regret even the worst instances of my life because they brought me to this point, right? Mm-hmm. So even my failures, even my mistakes, I wouldn't be who I am. I wouldn't have my wife. I wouldn't have my kids. I wouldn't have my grandkids. So I think, life is just hard. And if it hasn't hit you in the face yet, it will. It's not if, it's when. And so, you just have to understand that, we're never going to get to a place where everybody's going to agree and everybody's going to get along and everybody's going to be treated well. It's just not human nature. But we can all do better and we can make things better, but it's never going to be perfect. And I think that's just, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it will be perfect someday. But if you just impact the people that come into your universe, the people that you come in contact with, if you can be a better person for them or help them be a better person, there's a ripple effect to that. And so, I look back on my history and I look at all the mistakes and all the faults, so there's a wake over here, but there's also that positive wake. And I think on balance, at the end of the day, if the positive wake outweighs the negative wake, not a bad thing. So, hey, why don't we wind up here? And I guess, Zeb, I'd like to give you, some time for closing comments, anything that you want to share that you haven't had a chance to, anything you want to talk about, or anything that you want to ask in the last few minutes.
No, look, only to say that I've really enjoyed the conversation. You guys are having a diverse conversation around this. And Mike, and I've known you for a long time and trust you. You've been a great friend and a great mentor and a great confidant in many ways. So it's been an honor to be able to join. I think for all the things that are going wrong, or for lack of a better term, or poorly, or need improvement, I think there's a lot of great things that are also simultaneously happening in our country. And for anybody who really thinks that things are, then there's a lot of opportunity, but there's a lot of opportunity for improvement. But having traveled the world and seen how other countries and cultures are not as economically advanced, or don't have the same liberties that we do, I of all the places we could live on the planet, I'd still choose to be in America. So I'm an optimist by I guess DNA. I want to be an optimist. So I think we got great opportunity here. I think our Opportunity Zone Fund is going to continue to drive not just social impact, but economic impact in areas that really need it for consumers. And we're super excited about that. I think the world of healthcare is, we want people to live longer and be healthier. And I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you guys for all your time. Rue, I guess one last thing that you were talking about, I heard a term a number of years ago, get back to this leadership culture, right? Bringing your authentic self to work. I think that's super important because people that aren't able to do that they're not going to perform at the highest level. They're going to be distracted by other things. They're going to get worried about, what someone's thinking or doing, or am I being judged, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a distraction. So if you can, any leader out there that can create that sort of environment where people genuinely feel appreciated, feel like they can speak their mind, they don't worry about their job, and that's when you get the most out of folks. And I've found that they run through a brick wall for you. So again, authenticity is really important, I've found, and we'll continue to implement that in not only our portfolio companies, but anybody I get to work with on a daily basis. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Zeb, thanks for your time. Hey, Rue, you want to take us home, sir?
Oh, yeah.
Close us
out.
out.
By the way, 10-7, actually, this was very insightful for me. I was listening more than talking, but now I think I'm going to go down a rabbit hole of learning with Opportunity Zones. But to wrap it up, thanks everyone who was watching. And if you haven't yet, please share if you found any value to any of these. And we'll check for you again next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Bye-bye.